Hi everyone, today I have a special guest with me. Her name is Umberine WIlliams. She is a business development manager at Home Care Experts here in Melbourne. So she is someone who is not only a seasoned expert in the NDIS industry, but also a master at networking and building connections. So I thought it would be great to hear her insights on what is happening on the ground in the post-legislative changes era of NDIS. So welcome, Umberine.
Having me, Lucia. I feel very honored to be the first guest in, I hope, a very long line of guests for your series. And I've followed you for a while on YouTube and you've been doing some amazing things. So again, very honored to be here and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Alrighty, well, I guess we'll just start very simple and go into your background. So could you start by maybe sharing a little bit of your background in the NDIS field and when did it all begin for you and what were kind of the key milestones that have shaped your career so far?
Sure. My foray into the NDIS started before the NDIS actually started, which is when I started volunteering as a community visitor with the Office of the Public Advocate. So this is when we still had those group homes through DHHS at that stage, and I would have to go in unannounced and make sure everyone's rights were being upheld, and a lot of the time they weren't, and having to do a lot of report writing and things like that. And it was, to be honest, it shouldn't have been a volunteer position. It should have been a paid role because it was very, very involved. And that sort of sparked my interest in, disability and the NDIS space. And in 2018, I started working as a local area coordinator at the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. And I worked there for just under 6 years. And I did a few secondments as an early childhood coordinator, as well as a senior local area coordinator, and worked across Melbourne. I started off in Heatherton, around the Bayside area of Melbourne, and then moved to Frankston and supported participants around Frankston and the Peninsula. And yeah, that's how I started, and that's sort of what sparked my, I suppose, passion to support people with disabilities. And here I am now in the provider world.
Yeah, amazing. That's a load of experience there. Quite significant experience as well, being exposed to different areas. So you've been working in the LAC position for some time, and now you've transitioned to a private company. I guess what were the key events that, or maybe insights that you have had that made you want to switch those roles, going from the LAC to going to a private role? Sorry, private company.
I think it was more so to do with the change to PACE. So from the previous NDI CRM systems, they have now moved to the PACE systems. And with that, the role of the LAC has changed completely. So previously, the LACs were doing planning and doing justifications and working with the NDI delegates to build plans and get those plans approved for people. And then they could help implement those plans. But with PACE coming in, the LACs are no longer doing any planning. So most of the work of the LACs is a lot of ticking boxes, a lot of working on the PACE system. And I just felt like I wasn't really being able to help anyone the way that I previously was. And I felt like it was time for a change at that stage before, it got to a place where I didn't want to be there anymore. And that's when I started looking, and I applied at Home Care Experts, which was the first and only job I applied for. And I think it was a very good fit, and I was very, very grateful that they gave me the opportunity.
Fantastic. And I guess the follow-up question for the LAC role, you mentioned that, with the oncoming of the PACE system, a lot of your responsibilities have been taken away. Did the management tell you anything about what would be kind of the future going forward if all of those main components of being an LAC are being taken away? was there anything to maybe replace it, or how did you, like, how was this communicated to you at the time?
So the communication was that yes, we are getting pace, and there was a big build up to the rollout of pace. So we had a lot of training for that, but it wasn't very clear, and I don't think it still is very clear for the LACs about what exactly the role is, because as local area coordinators, they were never really meant to do planning. It was something they did because of the influx of participants accessing the scheme, and it was a larger number than the NDIS had anticipated. So that's why they had to bring the LACs on board to do the planning. And the original idea was that they would act as local area experts, so connecting people with providers and educating and building capacity in the community. But because of the large volume of participants coming onto the scheme, that changed. So once they had everything, I suppose, in order, and they had a new system come on board, they wanted the LACs to go back to their original roles. But because at the time that PACE rolled about, the LAC caseload was at about, when I left, over 250 per LAC. So there's not a lot of community capacity building you can do when you have such a high workload, and you still have to do things like assisting people to access the scheme and assisting anyone with incoming queries, as well as doing outgoing checks. So I still think that the role of the LAC is kind of lost, and they could be doing a lot more with the skilled workforce that they have.
That's an interesting one. As you mentioned, 240 participants per one LAC. That's a significant amount of people and requests coming in. So it's no wonder for, if a provider, a support coordinator, let's say, is trying to access an LAC and they don't get an answer in the next couple of days, that probably is quite normal then. You're right, you're correct that that's not a proper allocation of resources, I guess, a working force. All right, so I won't bother you more with the LAC, because obviously it's not fair, you're no longer in that role. So it would be quite interesting to hear more about the NDIS change, talk to you about more about the NDIS legislative changes. So what was your general experience so far post the 2024 legislative changes to the scheme? And did your company experience any setbacks, or was it affected in any way, if it has been affected at all?
So because I work at a provider and we're registered, so we're a registered SIL provider, none of the changes or the anticipated changes coming about have impacted us, thankfully, because we were already doing, I suppose, what the NDIS wanted us to do, which was register, pass all the audits, have the correct paperwork and all the frameworks and structures in place. So it hasn't impacted us, which has been really great. But I have seen a lot of other providers either, being unable to manage in this new NDIS legislative environment and have to shut shop, or really struggling with knowing what's happening, because it is quite scary for a lot of people. And if they're not connected with, the supports, if they're not connected with a wider network of people to bounce off of, it can be quite isolating, thinking that all these changes have come about. How am I going to survive as a sole trader, as a provider, and as an independent support coordinator, whatever it might be, as a provider who's not registered? So I think I've seen a lot of negativity, a lot of hopelessness out there with providers, and it's been really challenging, because at the end of the day, everyone's just here to support people, and to see people leaving, the industry altogether because of these changes has been really disheartening. And I think everyone just needs to do is help support each other. And if someone doesn't, know the answer to something, just help them, because we're all working for the same goal. We're all here to support people with disabilities. That's how, I hope that's why most people got into this industry. So we just have to bolster each other up.
100% agree, definitely. the end goal is to support people with disability in this area. And you are right that it is a big challenge and can be quite isolating for those that don't reach out and network and are not as connected as they should be right now, because there are obviously many different interpretations of the same rule, these legislative changes, and it really depends who you listen to. So it does really pay to reach out to your network and see what the actual general trends are, like what the general consensus is on certain subjects or rule changes. So do you think that is the biggest issue or the biggest challenge to overcome post these challenges, to keep in touch and network with everyone?
I think also just keeping on top of all the changes, because there's so many. It's hard, if you're working full time, if you have your own business, you're trying to run it yourself, and then on top of that, to keep on top of all of these changes, and sometimes they're daily changes, and they're in all different aspects. They might be on the commission website, they might be on the NDIS website, they might be, and just on LinkedIn, they might be just anywhere. So just trying to keep on top of all the changes, I think that's what is the hardest thing that I have found, is knowing what actually is a change and what is reality and what is coming, rather than something that may be more opinion based, and hearing that from someone that, oh, I've heard that this is what the NDIS is doing, and trying to not be caught up in all of that, and trying to just separate the fact from what people's opinions might be. And I've seen a lot of people as well struggle with that, with trying to keep up with what's going on, and how do we keep on top of these changes and make sure we're doing the right thing all of the time.
Yeah, agree. Okay. So I definitely see what you mean, that there's information everywhere. There's no one unanimous spot where you can go and just access everything. It seems to be popping out here and there everywhere. Not in one place, not cohesive at all. You kind of get bits of information here and there, and that has been, I have to admit, that has been very frustrating. To that, as you said, one day the things could be changing like every day, and you need to be on top of it. Absolutely. So yeah, alrighty. So that is one big problem that hopefully the system will solve.
I wish there was a better way to disseminate all this information, but I think they're just trying to get it out as wherever they can, and then it's up to us to figure out how we figure it out, really.
From your networking experience, is there any prominent stories that maybe pop in your mind that significantly affect providers in your network because of these changes?
I have heard of a few providers that have had to shut because of the changes, because how they introduce the yes and no list, and providers who may not have been doing the best, or may not have been invoicing properly, or may have been charging for something that was previously unspoken, but now is written as saying that the NDIS will not be paying for that support. They've had to obviously shut shop and try something else. But in saying that, and this might be a little bit controversial, but that yes and no list, it's only just been written down in black and white, whereas as an LAC or someone who worked within the NDI framework, it was always just something we knew, that you can't spend your funding on this, or you can spend your funding on this. So it wasn't a complete shock. And I've spoken to a lot of support coordinators as well, and they've also said that it wasn't a shock to them, because it was already something that they were telling participants that they shouldn't be spending their funding on. So I think the trouble came in when there were people who were utilizing these line items or these services, or they were providing these services, and they were told that it's now 100%, you can't have this. So I've seen a lot of disgruntled people, a lot of people who are upset. And yeah, it is challenging because, it was an unspoken rule, and the NDIS was happy, or seemed to be happy, to pay for these things in the past. And then they came and introduced this list, and a lot of people are now out of jobs because of that. So yeah, I do feel for those people, because with the NDIS, it's hard because it's a government run. It is the government, essentially. Whatever they say goes. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that just means they've lost their livelihoods.
That's right, yeah. So I agree with you in terms of the list, the yes and no. I think there was a guideline of what is deemed an NDIS support, what can be funded. I think that's how they phrase it, what can be funded by NDIS. So that's a schematic diagram that you can follow and basically answer your question of whether this or that support will be funded. But there are little subtle changes. Like, for example, I support people with psychosocial disabilities, and one of the biggest challenges for them, let's say, might be hoarding, and they absolutely need decluttering support. And that used to be covered under cleaning and house and yard maintenance. And now it is not. So unless it is specifically stated in the plan, it will not be covered. So that is quite a challenge, as well as before the legislative changes, you might have had verbal agreements with the NDIA planners that, yeah, this, you can access this, this, and that. And of course, that was never written anywhere.
Nope. Never. You'd be lucky if you ever heard from them again.
Exactly. So reaching out to those NDIA planners does not help at all. They do not have the authority to send you an email confirming that, yes, we did talk about this. Yes, I have approved it during the plan review, but now I can't say that it is. So that has definitely been devastating to the participants that, gathered their evidence, they've submitted it, they've argued for it, and obviously it is very stressful to be there and be questions on whether or not you deserve this or that support. It's very stressful for people, of course. So, and providers as well. Obviously, as you said, they had to, whatever government says, we kind of have to pivot. We have to deal, and sometimes we're not even given that much time, to be honest. So, yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm not sure whether you'll be able to, but are there any insights into what is happening on the LAC's level right now, considering these changes?
So I have spoken with a lot of my LAC colleagues, and they're, like always, LACs are always stuck between a rock and a hard place. So it's always them between the NDIA and, the providers, care teams, participants. And it's the same with these changes, where they're getting, daily emails and phone calls from whether it's providers or participants. So in an example, like where someone previously was being funded for that hoarding support is no longer. So now, the participant or the support coordinator or anyone else in their team, they don't have the details of the delegate. So they will just contact the LAC and they will ask them why. And the LAC doesn't really have many answers, because this is what they've been told by the NDIA, that this is yes and this is no. And they just had to field a lot of those incoming queries about why was this funded previously and now it's no longer funded. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of answers there. It's pretty much, like we discussed, where the government has said that this is what's happening, and we just have to do what they said. And it may have been funded previously, it may have been a verbal agreement, it may have been whatever it was. But now that they've said that it's something that's not on the list unless it is stated in your plan, you can't have it in your plan. So, their lives, LIC's lives have always been a little bit tricky, with having to be the person who's trying to appease both the NDI as well as providers and participants. And this is just, it hasn't changed much. It's just brought it up slightly, I think.
Thank you for that. Alrighty, well, you have posted a while back, and this is actually how we ended up connecting in the first place. So you've posted a very thought-provoking message, and I want to read it now. So it goes like this. Question 8643 for the NDIA leadership. I've noticed a concerning trend among my peers. Qualified professionals with extensive LAC and or support coordination experience are applying for APS 4, 5 or 6 planning roles, but aren't progressing beyond the application stage. These people have valuable expertise in planning and disability support, as well as extensive experience using the NDIA systems. Who then is being prioritized in the hiring process? We have seen some of very big changes to the scheme end of 2024. So now, knowing more about the changes now, how would you answer this question?
I still don't have answers for this question because it was a question, and I think that the heart of it, the NDIS is an insurance scheme. So from my perspective, it would serve the NDIS better if they didn't have people who were, I suppose, biased towards participants. So that would be, your LAC, your support coordinator, someone who's worked with participants for a while and knows how to advocate for them, whereas someone who is brand new to the NDIS industry altogether, they don't have those attachments or that bias, I would say, which would make it easier for them to, change a one-on-one sale request to a 1-to-3 sale request purely because maybe KPI driven or maybe something that they've been directed to do, and which we have seen a lot of happening recently where especially sale funding and even capacity building supports have been reduced without a proper explanation for it. So I think my question still stands is what kind of skill set is being prioritized for the people making the decisions within the agency, because from my own personal experience, I've had friends who are LACs, who are support coordinators, support workers, who have applied for roles, and they're not even higher up roles, they're APS 4, APS 5 sort of level roles. And they haven't even gotten past like the application stage. So I'm not really sure what exactly is going on within the NDIA, but the delegates that I have spoken to within the last, I'd say, 18 months, and the ones that I know have spoken to people I know, they are new to the NDIS, and their previous experience either may not be there, they may be in retail, it may be in hospitality, wherever it is, but they're very new to the NDIS itself. So my concern is why is the skill set of these people not being utilized, the people who have the previous skills and knowledge and experience working within the NDIS, working in the PACE system, working with participants. I think it's a bit strange that it's not really being taken on board and utilized, because I have a lot of friends that would have made great additions to the NDIA, and unfortunately they didn't even get a call or get the application looked at. So it is still a question I have, I suppose.
I guess it does come off very contradicting from the government's perspective when they try to package this NDIS scheme as something that, it's something that is really wonderful, really great for the vulnerable people who really need the support. So then why would they hire people who don't have that experience at all? So it's very contradicting in nature to say one thing on national air and then do complete opposite when it comes to actually hiring staff for these roles. And you are right, it is in the letters themselves, it is an insurance scheme, but it's just, my problem with it is like the fact that they're packaging it as we're going to give this great support to people who need it, but then again, that's not really what we are seeing with these changes as well.
No, and it's, if it was like one person I knew or two people who had gone through this process and been knocked back, be like, oh yeah, that's fine. They just didn't have the right skill set or experience or whatever it is. But like, I can count on more than two hands the amount of people I know who've tried for these jobs and been knocked back, and then hearing about the experience that the new hires have at the agency, and it's nowhere near the experience that these people have had. So it's just sort of 1+1 equals, So yeah, it is very concerning. And again, it is because it's an insurance scheme, but they try to market it as, social support, which it is as well. And I think both of the things are contradictory to each other and to their own, I suppose, existence and their future existence. So it makes it a very tricky space, and I would not want to be the one making the decisions at the NDIA. I can tell you that.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I guess what is your general view of the whole NDIS scheme then, where it is headed? Do you think it is sustainable long term?
Not with the way it has been going, which is why I think we've got so many, changes coming for providers and participants. So I think it'll be at least another decade before it is where they envisioned it would be when they first started it. But as a whole, I think the NDIS is an amazing system. So just for context, I'm Indian. I grew up in India, and there is no support for people in India who have disabilities. In fact, disability is not even something that is recognized. I've had family members with disability, and it was never anything that was ever spoken about. No, you're not going to get any referrals to specialists, nothing of that sort. It was always just ignored. And then to come to a country where not only is disability recognized and supported, but we've got the NDIS with all of its learnings still to do. But we've got this amazing system that is there to support people. So I think it's a wonderful system. It's just in its infancy. It's still very new compared to, Medicare and Centrelink. I think it's got a lot of growing to do, and we as providers, people who work within the scheme, we also have a lot of growing to do, and we just need to hold on for the ride because it'll be a while before things settle, I think.
The NDIS is actually one of its kind across the world, which is absolutely amazing. But I think the way it is going, it definitely is unsustainable long term. I understand that people will have difficulty giving up supports that they are used to. But again, we are under the influence of what the government tells us to do. So as long as the person is receiving main supports, main therapies, I think that's already such a big step up from most countries. It's unbelievable. And of course, any of us can end up on the scheme, and all of us want to see it prevail and continue and be sustainable in the long run. So any one of us can access it when we need it. What are your views on fraud in the system? Because obviously there's, that's one of the main reasons why the government is trying to push for these changes. And so there's been quite a lot of news articles recently in the last year, just talking about generally about Fraud Fusion Task Force. What are your views about this task force in general?
I mean, obviously, I think it is a very needed task force. And I have seen a lot of articles about, they've busted another provider and busted someone who's got, $4 million here and there and whatever, it's really, really disheartening to see things like that on the news. And I think that often the news and the task force and anything in the media always portrays the negatives. So always portrays all the fraud that's happening, what the government is doing to target the fraud, the providers who've committed the fraud. And a lot of people who are not part of the NDIS industry don't get to see the other side of things, which is the amazing changes in someone's lives through the NDIS and through non-fraudulent providers. And I think we never see those stories on the news. We never see anyone talking about how someone's achieved, all of their goals in their NDIS plan. And I've seen a lot of fraud as an LAC, not just from providers, but participants committing fraud. And let me tell you, I've seen some intricate schemes where, people have things set up with like burner phones and things like that, where they're committing actual fraud. And as an LAC, I was never sure about whether any of the complaints that were made to the fraud department were ever going anywhere, because we never saw anything come back. So it is good to see some news, some information out there about them, finding and getting rid of some of these providers or whoever is committing the fraud. Although I think we could temper some of that news and some of that information with some good stories about providers, good stories about participants, because often it's very hard to tell someone you work within the NDIS who is not familiar with the sector, aside from all the negatives going on within the NDIS. So it would be nice if there'd be some positives out there for a change, I think.
I agree. I think amongst all of the negative news that are seen, I don't know, probably for every 15, 20 articles, I only see like one positive article where an NDIS participant has succeeded with some type of activity or support. I think there was only one recently where there was a guy in Queensland who was doing beekeeping business, and he was trying to find people to employ also from NDIS as well. So that is quite an achievement. I think those stories should be, celebrated, right?
So, because that's what makes us want to keep working in the field, because no one wants to keep working in an industry where everything's negative all the time, like, fraud this, don't do this, you're doing this wrong, you have to register, you have to do this. It's very challenging. Like, our jobs are challenging anyway without having all of this negativity surrounding us all the time. So it's really nice to be able to hear those stories. And as an LAC, I saw a lot of those positives. And that's why I stayed there for so long, because it was really, really valuable to me to be able to see people, coming back after 12 months of having their plan and saying, oh, actually, I have like 7 brand new goals because I've done all of those other things now, and I've made all of these strides. I don't need this AT support. I don't need this anymore. And like, that's just amazing. And I think that's what the whole point of the scheme is, to provide support to people who really need it and help them build their capacity where possible, and just have providers there to support them and help them on that journey.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it's so nice to hear positive stories, definitely. But yeah, I guess the privacy issue is one where, some people might not want to share these stories, and it's like, people are more likely to leave negative reviews when they had a bad experience rather than leaving reviews when they had good ones. So it's a difficult one. So you mentioned registration is being another major issue. So what is your view on registration for providers? Do you think this should be mandatory for every service provider in the industry?
I think yes, but not how registration exists currently. So I think for every provider, there should be some checks and balances, because at the end of the day, you are working with vulnerable people. You are receiving, tax-paying funding. It is a government scheme, so there should be some, some policies, some checks, some balances where the government is able to see that everyone who is providing support is, utilizing funding, is doing something correctly, has, the proper skills, the proper training, all those policies and procedures in place. But the way that registration is currently set up is not tenable, not for, an independent support coordinator or an independent provider or someone who's not a large business. So I think, well, I suppose we'll just have to wait and see for mid this year to see what they say about the mandatory registration, and how that's going to work for SIL providers and independent support coordinators. Because, I would hate to lose a lot of these people. Like, I've spoken with several independent support coordinators in the last few months, and they've just said, look, we will likely leave the industry because we can't afford to be registered. We can't afford to go through the whole process of audit and get everything in place that is needed for it. And these are people who worked in social services and disability for decades. And for them to say they want to leave the industry altogether, I think that would be a massive loss. So let's hope that the NDIS, brings about a change in the registration process and requirements.
It's going to be an interesting one. I agree. Definitely, I think the mandated date for registration for support coordination at the moment is 1st of July 2025. And so that was a very short period for providers to all of the papers in place for the audit. It's going through it. I went through it. It's quite, and I'm still waiting for my registration, by the way. It requires a lot of work to be put in and a lot of hours, which obviously will be unpaid. Plus, on top, you have to pay for the registration as well, for the auditing. And I guess it's going to be very interesting to see how they're going to cope with an influx of all of these registration requests going in, because right now, in my understanding, I saw a notice on the NDIS Commission's website where they were saying they are still attending to 2023 requests as a priority. So that is very, it's troubling. I am nervous. I am definitely nervous because I've submitted my request in September last year and still no word, still no nothing. There is no communication at all. I knew this was going to happen. I think the general wait period is probably up to 2 years. That's what I've heard from a lot of providers. So I was kind of prepared for it, but I was not prepared that the mandate for registration there'll be a specific date. So now, someone like me, well, what am I going to do when 1st of July hits? It's very questionable at this stage, and hopefully they will provide more information going forward, because it's
really hard, because they've let, with all the information they have been giving out, there's still a lot that's in the air, and they've left people sort of just, waiting. And these are people's livelihoods,
Exactly.
You need to know what is happening. You need to know what your business is going to face. And they haven't made any solid announcements or given any, proper details about what happens past that 1st of July date to providers such as yourself, who've, submitted everything you needed to submit. You've done everything by the book. And what if your registration doesn't come through? So I think they need to really solidify the information and stop leaving people hanging. It's really not fair. And I think everyone's constantly on edge because of this. Everyone's worried about their jobs, worried about their futures. Participants are worried about whether the providers can continue supporting them. Providers are worried about whether they'll have a job tomorrow. And that's no way to, live, really. So I think the NDIS really needs to put things in black and white, which unfortunately they haven't been the best at in the past. So I hope they get better.
I hope so too. I hope so too. And I guess hypothetically, if you were able to create a reasonable rule or policy for NDIS, this is a fun question. Yes, so if you were able to create such a rule for NDIS, what would it be and why?
Okay, I would probably take away the dollar amounts from every plan. So instead of saying you have been funded for $4,000 for whatever OT or speech, I would say you have been funded for, a speech assessment and OT assessment, whatever it is, and weekly speech, weekly OT. I think just take the dollar amounts out of the plan, because I've seen a lot of participants who have seen their plans and have seen what they've been funded, and they instantly think that it's money, whereas it's not. It's funding. It's not something that they can get their hands on. It's something that is sort of in the cloud somewhere. And it's something that's utilized to pay providers for services, whereas a lot of people see it as, I need that money because I need to pay my rent, or I need to, buy my cigarettes, or whatever it is that they need to do, and it's theirs. And I think that's where the NDIS may do better if they change that to funding or hours. Or like, for example, how WorkSafe does it is they say, right, you have been approved for physiotherapy, you have been approved for a swim and gym membership, you have been approved to see the specialist. They don't specify, here is $570 to see a neurosurgeon. You don't know how much the neurosurgeon costs. You don't know how much the physio costs or the gym membership costs, because you've just been given an approval and that's all you have. So I think if the NDIS went more in that direction, that would reduce fraud both on participant and providers. You wouldn't see that dollar amount, and I think that would work a bit better. But what do I know? I'm just a provider.
I think that's a really great one. I think definitely that seeing the numbers and the values coming from a vulnerable background, seeing those numbers, let's say you've been allocated 200,000 for a year for supports, that is definite dollar signs that you want to attribute to your bank account, because you've been given this, right? So why can't you use this towards your rent, as you said, things like that. So it puts vulnerable people in a more vulnerable situation, I think. I completely agree. Like this would be such a nice rule to have as well, where you just have an hourly allocation towards a support, and that's it. There's no values. It will take away the changes to the price guide as well, where we will have to seek constant increase in funding just to, close those gaps for the changes in those supports. Like right now, the psychologists' rates have been increased, so those people that received their plans prior, or like the funding and the hourly allocation, that has been skewed now, and you have to go in with the change of circumstance and ask for these changes to the plan.
Yeah, I know it's
Yeah,
very
it's
challenging, and I
interesting.
think if you just take away that dollar amount, and I don't think you're curbing anyone's choice and control, because you're still receiving that support. You can still choose where to utilize the funding. You just don't need to know exactly how many dollars and cents it is. No one really needs to do it. It's only the provider who's providing that support, who just claims it directly from the NDIS. Or if you're self-managing, you can see the amounts, but usually I think if you're self-managing, you do need to prove that you are financially sound. You haven't been bankrupt. You're not dependent on purely the DSP and things like that. So I think it would be a welcome change, but maybe the next change, I'm not sure.
All right, guys, so if you're enjoying this conversation and you find it informative and interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I would really love to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so your help would be very welcomed. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the networking, because that's quite an important subject, as we have established. Very important to be connected in this industry. So you share a lot about the networking and disability events that you visit and or hold on LinkedIn. Can you share with those listening in which ways have these been transformative?
Yeah. Well, for one, before I came into the provider space, I didn't even know networking within the NDI space existed. So it was a brand new thing for me to walk into. I've made so many connections. It's been really, really amazing to see some of the work some of those providers are doing out there. And I think what's really been beneficial is just establishing that trust and building those real relationships with people, which are not just surface level relationships, which you can often find, in a business development or sales kind of role where it's all about transactions. Whereas I've felt that a lot of these networking events and a lot of these meetings and, expos and things like that, where I've met with people. People actually want to form a relationship with you, and it's then leading to, cross referrals, which if I can't support someone, I know and trust someone else who can do the same thing. So I don't see it as competition. I see it as, here's a menu, all the providers are on it, and this is the participant's choice. And yeah, it's been really, really amazing to be able to meet some of these people on that menu and be able to present them as options as well, in conjunction with my own organization. So I think networking is really, really valuable if done right.
Absolutely. So I guess what is the wrong way of networking?
I think the wrong way would probably be treating it as a sales opportunity. So going in and, handing out your business cards and flyers to everyone in the room and not really engaging with them on a human level, just saying, here is my list of services, send me a referral, and everyone's there with their mouths wide open. Like, why would I ever do that? Because I don't know you. And that's what I find very, very interesting about the NDIS business development and networking space, is it's all built on trust. There's more people providing those services than there are people buying those services. So you really have to make sure what you are selling is something people want to buy, and not just because what you have is of value, but also because you have the same values as them, they trust you and you trust them. So I think people just need to realize that it's not just a sales game. It's, it's real life, it's real connections, and just treat it as such.
Whenever I go to networking events, I end up with so many business cards, and not only a few of them I can remember what we actually talked about and how we connected, and just, the positive stories that might have come up, or the values. The values is the biggest for me, is when I hear these things in our conversation, and I hear that you have the same values as I do. It's like a mental tick. I'm like, yes, I want to talk more with you.
Yeah,
I want to talk more with you.
Yeah. I think that's what I find most people I've spoken to in the industry are the same. And there are the other, providers I've seen who you can tell by talking to them that they're not really in this for the best reason. They got into it because they saw those dollar signs. They saw, people's plans with their $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, and they said, right, let's make some money. And you can spot those very, very clearly. And I just wish that, they decided to go somewhere else, because if they continue to be in this game, I think that's what will hamper it and make it not so sustainable in the long run.
I agree. So I see what you mean. There are definitely providers who are not in it for the right reasons. And what is your way of dealing with these providers when you are at the events themselves? Because it's one thing when you just get a spam email, and we all get those, tens of thousands. But when it's actually face to face, it could be a little bit difficult to manage, because you are right there. It might be difficult to just stop the conversation. I don't want to talk to you, and go somewhere else. Obviously, there are social rules. And what is your way to handling these types of people when you think that you have encountered one? Obviously, it doesn't really happen a lot, but sometimes you can really tell that the person in front of you is not there for the right reasons. So yeah, how do you deal with this?
It is a tricky one to handle, because in this industry, it's all about relationships and trust and connections. And I feel everyone is really careful about what they say, who they say it to, what relationships they have. So, I've come across people who I've heard are not, doing the most above board job, or are implicated in something or the other. And it's just, it's a little tricky to navigate those conversations with them, where you still have to be, your own social normal self, and still try and keep your distance. And there has been instances, like I've attended an expo in the past where the host specifically said to everyone that the point of the expo is for the people who have the tables to, give out their business details and their cards because they've paid to be there. And for the people who are coming in as guests who haven't paid, it's for them to learn about the providers that are there. So we've had instances where, for example, a person came in and they didn't even want to have a chat with the table host. They just wanted to give out their business cards to everyone. And very quickly we had to flag that with the host, because you could tell that that person was just there to get other people's details into the little database or whatever it is. And then the host kept an eye on them to, make sure that they weren't continuing to do that. And I think it's just a matter of navigating the events that you go to as well. So if I have been told, something not so favorable about a provider, I'll tend to stay away from their events or their people or whatever they are putting out, because, you'd rather, like I was always taught, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything. So I sort of tend to use the same thing. If I don't have anything good to contribute to those sort of events or those dialogues, I'd rather just not be there at all. And just, try and develop those good relationships you have formed and build that trust. And, it's not about spreading misinformation or gossiping or telling other providers about what you've heard. It's just about your own self and your business where you work, and just engaging only with the providers you can trust.
I agree that there is certain pressure to be nice in the sector as well, and so be very giving towards one another. So I agree that it's a little bit difficult to deal with people like that in those circumstances. But you're right. We as providers will tend to gravitate towards those that are more similar in our values and our views, and that how we deliver our supports to the participants in the end. So that's kind of the emphasis, I guess, that we should form, rather than focusing on the negative relationships in this industry. So yeah, I totally agree. Alrighty, well, I guess we'll wrap this up, and if you could share with us any good outcome story for a participant your company recently supported.
Yeah, I mean, we have several, but the one I think that comes to mind is we had a really, really complex participant who has a psychosocial disability and a lot of comorbidities with her physical health as well. And she was in hospital for a very long time, and was refusing support from hospital staff and was quite violent and aggressive towards them as well. And we worked with the MACNI team as well as her support coordination team to get a discharge from hospital. And now she has achieved, I'd say, 6 out of 8 of her NDIS goals. Goals such as I'd like to live independently, I would like to engage with the community, I'd like to get back in touch with my family, and things that you wouldn't think are big goals, but to someone like her who was completely disengaged from not just her family, but also NDIS supports and any community and mainstream supports, it's massive. And just to see that happening is, it's been really, really wonderful. And again, like we were talking about the positive stories, this is not something that would ever be shared on the news or anything, because it is a very private person, and wouldn't want to engage with the wider community for them to know what was happening. But as a provider, to know this is the kind of support we're providing, this is the kind of person who we were able to take from hospital, who was violent, hitting out, had been incarcerated for most of her adult life, and to come to this, being able to achieve most of her NDIS goals, I think this is why we all do what we do. Is to see outcomes like this.
Wow, that's incredible. That's such a nice story to hear. Yeah, that's what we're here for, right? So just to see the positives as well. Okay, well, how can people find you?
Well, find me on LinkedIn, where I'm very active. But no, look, I work at Home Care Experts, and feel free to find us on any of our social media or on our website, or you can contact me directly. If you are looking for supports, our niche is that complex medical support, supporting people who've got behaviors of concern, who've got restrictive practices, anyone who's needing hospital discharge. We work a lot in that complex field that is the gray area between health and disability, as we are owned and operated by nurses. So yeah, if you have any questions, or even if you've got a question about the NDIS or, the LAC experience, feel free to get in touch, and I'm happy to have a chat.
You have an event coming up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So we have an event coming up on Valentine's Day, actually. So it's called Heart to Heart. And in it, we will be, we have a few different presenters from a few different organizations to talk about disability and relationships and sex and love and social connections, and how we as providers can support our participants better to engage in meaningful and safe relationships. So we've got providers such as the Click Connection coming all the way from South Australia to do a presentation. We have the Spot Center, who are going to be presenting on an allied health perspective, including you, who's going to be talking about a few case studies as support coordinators. We have, we've got, I'm forgetting her name, but it's Everfaith Therapies, Alana from Everfaith Therapies, who is a social worker and sexologist, talking about that aspect of disability and relationships. And we've got a couple more. So yeah, I think it'll be a fantastic event, and everyone, I think, should learn a bit more about how we can support our participants better and not have relationships and disability and sex be things that are so taboo to talk about.
That sounds like amazing topics to talk about, and I'll definitely be there. Where can we find the information about this event?
Yes, so the event is up on Eventbrite, and I've also posted it on our LinkedIn page, and our Home Care Experts page has also got it up on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been amazing talking and listening to you. You've provided so much information and insights about this. It's been really great to listen to that.
Well, thank you so much, Lucia, for having me and for the privilege of being the first on the show. So yeah, really, really appreciate it. And I remember when we first met quite a few months ago, I know you were talking about this. I'm really glad that you were able to get it up and running. And I cross my fingers that you have your 1,000 followers by the end of this year.
Thank you so much. So there you have it, guys. Thank you so much for joining in today and listening to us talk with Umberine. So if you have found this information useful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in the next one.